Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Welcome to another edition of the Sulaimaan Ravat Show. Yes, Friday evening once again. We welcome you from wherever you may be watching the program this beautiful evening. I've just returned from Rustenburg. Yes, it's been a while, almost a year since I've been there. It was absolutely lovely to meet with many of the viewers of this program in Rustenburg this afternoon. I did the Jummah talk at the Zinyaville Jummah Masjid. Hit and run kind of, trip. Left this morning early and then Jummah and a bit of a program before Jummah at the Muslim school and then back by this evening. And now talking to our viewers out in Rustenburg, out in various parts of the country and surrounding countries, live this evening from our studios here in Sunninghill, Johannesburg. We've had some lovely rains, haven't we? A bit of flooding in the last week here in some parts of Joburg. But alhamdulillah, we should continue to make dua for beneficial rain. There's so much more to be grateful for than to complain about. If you look at it positively and if you look at it holistically and comprehensively, sometimes we kind of just hone in and zoom in and just focus on what's not going the way it's supposed to go. And we forget about the many things that are going the way it's supposed to go. Well, the one thing that we will still be talking about for quite some time is COVID and everything related to that, even though we are now in level 1. But the impact of the pandemic, the impact of lockdown is long-term in many instances, economic, as well as educational, right? We know what has happened to the school year, and the impact will be for the rest of this year, going into next year, at the bare minimum, and then perhaps even beyond that. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that first up on the program with Ismail Taladia. He is a senior curriculum planner at the Western Cape Education Department. He's been a teacher for 30 years. In 2013, he won the National Teacher Award for the best high school teacher. Wow, subhanallah. And we'll be talking in a bit about the impact of COVID on education and some of the issues pertaining to that. But I want to focus a little bit more about teaching as well in the initial part of the interview. Let's go to Ismail Taladia. Ismail, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the program this beautiful Friday evening.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you, Moulana Sulaimaan, and to the viewers.
30 years of teaching, what do you like the most about your profession?
Well, I think the fact that every day is going to be a different day. Every day you're meeting with young people, that have their own challenges. So as a teacher, when you're stepping into that classroom, you should be the shining light to those learners. There's 40 or 50 of them sitting in that classroom, and each of them have their own challenges. Some of them may have had food that morning, some of them may not have had that food that morning. But at the end of the day, there's a group sitting in front of you. You are the common denominator in that room, and you need to then shine a light for them. You need to be that shining light for them. You need to be the role model for them. You need to provide them with hope that today and tomorrow is going to be a good day for them. So I think the role of the teacher is a critical one. It is the one that is going to mold our learners into being the best that they can be, no matter what their challenges are.
You've been teaching for 3 decades, as I've mentioned. So there is a significant generational gap between yourself and your current students. When we listen at times to teachers who are more or less in your age category, who've been teaching for more or less the same duration that you have, they seem to complain that it's become much more difficult. Children are much more spoiled. Discipline is not what it used to be like before. Enforcing discipline is much more difficult now. Corporal punishment and all of that has been outlawed. Do you share that sentiment? Is it more difficult to be a teacher in this day and age as compared to, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago when you just started out?
Probably a little bit more challenging, but not necessarily totally overwhelming. I think it is important to understand, your role as a teacher. What do you stand for? What is your brand as a teacher? When learners and your colleagues know exactly what you're about, they will begin to respect you. Sometimes you walk into a classroom and a colleague may say, child X and child Y is difficult, and you sit back and you say, wow, that child hasn't given me any problems in my classroom. So what am I doing, and what are my colleagues doing? So it's about being consistent in terms of what you deliver. It is about having your own brand, about being punctual. It's about developing a good work ethic. It's not, whatever personal issues you have, you leave that in the boot of your car when you step out of your car on the school premises, and when you walk into that classroom, you develop a personality that is going to enlighten those learners. So the challenges, I think, needs to be one where the school and the staff as a whole has a collective, or take a collective responsibility for what is going to happen at that school. And if everybody's working from that same page, then the learners will understand that they are there to work, and those learners that are going to be difficult will stand out like a sore thumb if all of the teachers in that particular school are working off that same page. They have the same vision for what education needs to be all about. And I think that is basically what will counter the issue of difficult learners. I think the fact that there's so much inconsistency amongst our own teachers and at each particular school, that creates a channel for the learners to begin to challenge teachers. And I think if we allow that to happen, then our teachers will say it's difficult. I also believe that the teacher needs to develop that energy, and maintain that energy no matter how old you are, whether you're starting teaching or whether you have had 30 years of being in the classroom. I think you need to maintain that energy so that the learners are going to work with you from wherever you are. I mean, whenever I have talks with teachers, I basically tell them, if you getting to age 55 and you go on a go slow, then you rather step out of teaching, because then you're doing a disservice to the learners. You are there, you get paid to do what you need to do. So step in there and do what is right. Don't go on a go slow and wait for retirement. Then rather step out now. Sorry to be so crust about that.
No, absolutely. It's important, the point you make. Now, if you look at the space, the educational space, especially when it comes to schooling, primary schooling, high schooling, how much has it evolved? I mean, today you're dealing with kids who each have a gadget in their hands, who have a profile, Instagram profile, Facebook profile, TikTok profile. How much has remained the same over 30 years, and how much has changed? What has evolved?
Well, I think, as you rightly pointed out, the fact that ICT has played a big role in terms of how learners view themselves. And yes, it is challenging, but COVID-19 has just showed us how significant the online space is. And therefore, it becomes important for teachers and even parents and our community to understand the role of those devices. That device can be a positive and have a positive effect on your child, or it can have a negative effect on your child. And when we talk about exam preparation, I mean, in as much as there are cell phone policies in workplaces, we should be having a cell phone policy at home, and there's nothing wrong for a parent to step in and say, well, between this time and that time, you're going to surrender your cell phone. That kind of respect needs to be developed within the home, so that the devices are used for the purpose that it is there to enhance and to help and to assist, but not as a mechanism that is going to allow for procrastination, a mechanism that is going to steal time from what the learner is supposed to be doing positively, because we need to control those things. Yes, we say times have changed, but if we allow the circumstances to change around the mechanisms, then we're definitely going to find ourselves in a lot of difficulty.
I want to just ask you to elaborate on this aspect of online schooling. And just this morning over breakfast, I was having this discussion with a few board members of a Muslim school. And we were speculating as to how this could unfold in South Africa in particular, because the socioeconomic conditions in our country are very different to, say, first world countries, European countries, the West. Many students cannot afford data, they cannot afford the gadgets. Secondly, in many homes, both parents are working. So when you send your child to a school physically, they are under the supervision of the school. When you leave them at home, in terms of an online option, supervision of the kids becomes a bit of a challenge. Now, many schools, especially the private schools, Muslim schools, had no option but to go online during the lockdown period. And some of them still are doing online teaching partially. But do you see a big jump in the number of students preferring now to go totally online in terms of seeking education in the near future in South Africa?
Well, I think COVID-19 has almost propelled us into a state where, it's going to become what commonly is said to be the new normal, that we're not going to step back into sort of normal classroom teaching of teachers standing in the front of the room in front of a chalkboard. But a lot of what teachers are going to be doing is going to be online. Even if the teacher is in the classroom, the teacher is still going to make use of a smart board. The teacher is going to make use of a tablet and use data projectors in order to get the necessary lesson across to the learners. What is important and what we've seen over the past couple of months through COVID-19 and the lockdown has been the extremities that we find within South Africa. On the one hand, we have the schools that have all of the mechanisms and devices, and there were some schools up until today one could say have not lost one day of teaching because teachers have been busy working with those learners online. The learners are following a strict program. And then on the other hand, you have learners that haven't stepped into the classroom, that have not been able to use their devices, that have not been able to go into online teaching. So we have these extremes, and therefore the teacher and the education departments and the schools itself, they need to work out a program that is best going to suit their particular school population. So what is it that they're going to do? If you have in one of the Model C schools or one of your private schools where all these mechanisms are available, then the teacher needs to adapt in order to be able to provide online teaching. And teachers have become extremely skilled over the past couple of months in terms of doing online teaching. On the other hand, where we find learners and schools do not have access to all of these things, as you mentioned, there's data issues, then the teacher needs to focus on teaching in the classroom, focus on chalkboard teaching, but also being able to bring in some kind of online teaching with those learners while they're in the school space physically. So that kind of adaptability becomes important in terms of the teachers being in a position to be able to move in between the online teaching, but also physically standing in front of his or her learners and being able to still continue in providing the necessary teaching to those learners. I think we've all been propelled into that space of suddenly having to learn to work with Zoom and work with MS Teams in terms of doing online meetings, to do online teaching. And what's going to become important is probably assessment, how we're going to do assessment, because at universities, they're already looking at doing some of the assessment online. So yes, we've moved very quickly, but it's now, as we move into a space where we're saying, this is the new normal, we need to all adapt to it, and how is it best going to serve our particular context in that private school or whether in a public ordinary school.
All right, time for a break. When we come back, we continue the discussion on education with Ismail Taladi, a teacher with 30 years of experience. Welcome back. So we're talking education with Ismail Taladia. He's a senior curriculum planner at the Western Cape Education Department. He's also been a teacher for 30 years. In 2013, he won the Best High School Teacher Award in the National Teacher Award. So a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom that he's accumulated over the years. Ismail, in the last segment, I asked quite a few questions that looked at, your understanding of education and the educational space in a retrospective sense over the last 30 years. What's your thoughts going forward? I mean, again, this morning we were having the same chat over breakfast that for Muslim schools in particular and schools in general, what should the vision be for the next 25, 30 years? What are some of your hopes? What are some of your fears for the education space in our country going forward another decade or two?
Well, I think very importantly, what needs to happen is the discussion that happens at our tertiary institutions with the teacher preparation at tertiary institutions, because in some instances I feel that some of our student teachers are not being prepared well enough for stepping into the classroom. I think and I'm going to make the bold statement by saying that some of the students that have ended up in the education faculty are perhaps not there for the right reasons, and that university management needs to be looking at those students in terms of exactly where they want to be. We don't want students to be in the education faculty by default because they couldn't get into the sciences, engineering, or medical fields, and so they end up in the education faculty because they want to be at a tertiary institution. So when we're selecting students to go into education, it must be because they want to be in education, because they want to make a difference, because if they're just going to do a job, then really they're not going to do justice to the education space going forward. So that is probably one of the key areas that we need to have a look at. We need to have clear discussions with learners in terms of what they want to do going forward. And then, of course, we need to be clear within the education space as to exactly what the role and responsibilities of our teachers are. We cannot have teacher unions trying to muscle in when things are getting a little tough for teachers. I think, if you've chosen to go into teaching, you're going into teaching with the idea that you want to make a difference. And no matter what the circumstances are, yes, we can question management of schools. Yes, we can make requests to the education department. But if our teacher unions are coming in to be frivolous about what exactly their roles and responsibilities are, or holding teachers accountable to delivering in the classroom, then we need to ask serious questions. And so my concern going forward is that, one, we need to establish the teaching profession as that noble profession and have the respect for teachers that we once had way back. And so that must be the first part of it. The second part must be the fact that when we do teacher training, that we're having the best candidates that are undergoing teacher training. So, and that the universities need to step up in terms of their process of teaching teachers, so that when those teachers step out of the university into the classroom, they must know that they have been as best prepared as possible. I think it's very important in terms of a third point to say that we cannot allow teacher unions to dictate when teachers are not performing, and so that is one area that we need to look at very seriously, because ultimately, if all our teachers are committed and we know exactly what it is that we want to achieve, then of course the glitches in education and some of the challenges could be eradicated. We've gone through, and because of 30 years of teaching, we've gone through Christian national education, we've gone through people's education, we've gone to curriculum 2005, we in CAPS at the moment. So we've gone through all of that, but the pivotal person is the teacher. So in as much as we've experienced all of those different teaching policies, the teacher is still pivotal. So I've gone through that experience, and I'm saying a number of other teachers will be going through that. And whether there's a change in the regime, the fact is you're a teacher, you have a responsibility, you need to be accountable for what it is that you deliver in the classroom, and you need to know what drives you when you're stepping into that classroom on a daily basis. So no matter what the changes are, whether we're going to move a lot more to ICT, whether technology is going to be me teaching from my house, at the end of the day, if the teacher is focused on what he or she needs to do, then I think we'll adapt to whatever changes comes along going forward.
On the topic of curriculum development, what's currently being discussed? What's the projections? What are the predictions? What are the trends internationally that are being looked at locally for adoption?
I think the most important thing that we need to be looking at is our current education and our current curriculum. The issue that our South African curriculum is very much knowledge-based and content-based, and we need to be looking at a lot more in terms of skills development. So the talks are around the issue of skills development. The talks are around trying to get our learners to focus more on let's call it artisanal programs. And I think that is an area, if we want to develop this country, we need to develop artisans. If we make comparisons to what is happening in Europe, in Germany, Switzerland, well, 60% of learners when they're going into the secondary school phase are going to move into the artisanal space, meaning they're going to be looking at becoming apprenticeships. So we're looking to take them into the apprenticeship programs. And the apprenticeship program is not only about electricians and plumbers, but there's a whole host of other technical development and skills development programs that our learners need to be focusing on in order to move into developing this country. So that is the one area, obviously, that is taking a lot of focus, and I think we're pushing that from the education side. Is we've heard about the three-stream model, but we want to turn that into practice, where we're actually getting our parents and our communities to think more around artisanal programs than to just think that university is the end all of where our learners need to be. So let's look at artisanal programs. Let's begin to look at respecting an honest day's work. So if we have a bricklayer, let's respect what that bricklayer does, because we cannot build homes without good qualified bricklayers. But if you ask a parent, would you consider your child to become a bricklayer? The answer immediately is going to be no, and it doesn't matter from which demographic community you come from. The answer is no. If you say to them, would you want your son or daughter to become a plumber? They're going to say no. They all thinking university is the best option for all their children. And if we want to develop this country, then we need to be looking more towards technical and skills development amongst our learners, as opposed to everybody ending up at university.
Indeed, I think that's definitely something that parents should take cognizance of. Not everyone can make it to be a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher. Not everyone's skill set is geared for that. Now, in terms of the impact of the COVID pandemic on this academic year, we know in a practical sense what happened during lockdown, how schools had to manage, the kind of setbacks that resulted from that. Schools are still struggling on many fronts in terms of, managing. Some are doing the platooning system. Some have got all students back and they're doing social distancing. Do you agree with the decisions that have been taken in terms of the scrapping of exams, in terms of how matrics are going to approach their final exams? In your opinion, could anything have been done differently in terms of the decisions that have been taken?
Well, and because I'm an education official, it is going to be a little bit of a challenge in terms of having to say whether we agree with all the decisions that have been made. I think it is important to take cognizance of the fact that we have extremes in our country, that there are learners, as I mentioned at the beginning of the chat, that are up to date with the curriculum as it is. However, there are also learners that probably haven't been in school. If I listen to what the MEC for Gauteng said during the course of the week, he mentioned something like 50 odd thousand learners that have not been accounted for as yet. In the Western Cape, we probably have a similar number. And then you ask yourself the question, well, so where are those learners? And in my mind, as far as the Western Cape is concerned, probably the bulk of them are still in the Eastern Cape, and that is what lockdown has caused. So how do we go about progressing the learners? So obviously the education authorities have decided on a process of assessment. I think it is just that they have made the test to be contextual, meaning that each school will decide on the type of test that they will set up for their learners. But the standard being that all learners will write a test. And so what are you going to test those learners on? With the platoon system, the learners are not getting a full complement of the content coverage that is required under normal circumstances. So obviously your assessment is going to be adapted to what you have been taught. And the education department has made a clear decision that all tests that will be written at the end of the year is going to only cover terms 3 and term 4 work. How much work are we going to be able to get through in term 4 if we're looking to start by the 18th of November? So under the circumstances, I think it is probably the best decision that could have been made, meaning that there needs to be some kind of assessment. We've pushed from our side as senior curriculum planners in terms of working with the national department that our focus needs to be a lot more on skills. Let's see if we can develop the skills of learners as opposed to focusing too much on the content that needed to be covered. And if we up the skill sets of learners in terms of reading, in terms of trying to understand content, in terms of focusing on making them develop self-regulation skills, then I think we've achieved something as opposed to looking at content coverage. Where it comes to the matrics, I think the matrics have covered quite a bit of work, and that the exams will be supposedly a normal examination, meaning that all of the content would have been covered for the learners. But the circumstances have been different and quite extraordinary, and therefore the expectation in terms of results cannot be the same as we've had over the past couple of decades. That the expectation in terms of results are definitely going to be different this year.
In your opinion, then, how significant are the concerns that the quality of the matriculant of 2020 will be severely compromised, and it'll have a kind of knock-on effect?
Of course, we can't expect to have those top-notch results, especially sort of from our average learners. We know that you have learners and kids that are, I mean, they don't need much in order to focus on developing their study skills in terms of studying the content, in terms of being able to deliver top performances. I don't think that's going to change much. But I think in general, our learners probably have not gone through the kind of support that they would have under normal circumstances. Yes, there's lots of catch-up programs. Yes, there's spring schools that will be happening. Yes, we're doing tutoring. Even through IT, we're trying to assist them with tutoring now on a Saturday morning. But it is not going to be the same. And therefore, we cannot expect the same results from the class of 2020. So that in itself is going to be a challenge. You know, just looking at the number of learners, matric learners in the Western Cape, for example, that have come back to school, we're only sitting on I think about 94%. So if you're looking at 50,000 students, then you're looking at about 600, probably just over 1,000 matriculants that have not reported for duty, so to speak. And that could be the same thing across the country. So definitely there's already a dropout in terms of the number of matriculants that are going to be sitting for the final examinations. And then of those, a number of them would probably not have been prepared as they would have been under normal circumstances.
Final question then, Ismail. We're already, into deep into October. The year will be over before we realize it. What kind of knock-on effect will all of what happened in 2020 as a result of the pandemic have on the next academic year? Let's take a best-case scenario. A vaccine is found. There's no second wave. Schooling is normal next year, 2021. But then, too, what kind of adjustments and adaptations would need to take place in the next academic year to compensate for what happened this year?
I think there's definitely going to be sort of lots of catch-up that needs to be done. But then the question comes to mind, as I mentioned quite early on, our curriculum is very much content-based. Mm-hmm. So we need to look at going into 2021 to develop and enhance the skills of our learners. Let's develop those skill sets that they have. Let's see how we can develop that so that learners can get into almost a self-regulatory program of not having to depend on the teachers as much as they've done in the past. We've moved into a space of online teaching. We've moved into a space of finding things via Google or all of the other platforms. So it does become important that we begin to use the learnings of 2020 and take that into 2021. But we cannot go on with business as usual. That means doing the curriculum as we would have under normal circumstances. There needs to be a space created for learners who have lost out, for those learners to pick up on the academic approach. One of the things that we've picked up during this particular academic year and after the lockdown period is that some learners have flourished on the online teaching process, mm-hmm. whereas others have fallen back. One, because they're not getting the online teaching because of data and access to devices, etc. So those learners are going to come back to school next year with a huge backlog. The only thing that we can do, we're not going to have to worry about too much of the content coverage, but rather getting those learners' skills to be enhanced. Those learners that have flourished under the issue of working online, we need to find the space for them to continue in that particular environment, as opposed to going into complete normal teaching, chalkbook teaching. We cannot do that. And therefore, it becomes important that teachers begin to do sort of a self-reflection, that schools do some kind of self-reflection in terms of what they've achieved this year under these extraordinary circumstances, and how do they take that into the 2021 to enhance what they've learned through this year. How do we take that forward to improve our engagement with our learners?
Yeah.
And one of the very important things is our parents have also played a big role. Having sat at home with your children for 2 or 3 months, close to that particular time frame, what are you going to do? Do you just, as a parent now, sit back and say, wow, I'm happy that my child is off my hands. They're all going back to school, and now I can sit back and relax? Keep on doing what you were doing. If you were helping them with their homework, with their teaching, understanding online work, then you need to continue with that, because without that parental support, what is going to happen in the school is always going to be a challenge.
Ismail Taladia, it's been a fascinating discussion. Shukran so much for your time this evening. We really do appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Moulana, and hope to talk to you soon.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Time for a break. When we come back, it's the weekly snippet from Surah Yusuf. Welcome back. So that was a very interesting discussion with Ismail Taladia, who's been a teacher for 30 years education official with the Department of Education in the Western Cape, heavily involved in curriculum development. It's been a big struggle. It's been a big challenge for parents. I know my wife was telling me the other day, because the school our kids go to work on a platooning system. So some days they're at home, some days they're not there. It's getting a bit much because, you know, you used to having your own space, and now they're all over the show, and then they end up getting on each other's nerves, and after every session, then they're in the kitchen, and all of a sudden they're hungry every now and then. But parents have put in a lot of effort, they've made a lot of sacrifice, and hopefully they'll see the dividends of that. For the past few weeks, during the last segment of the program, I've been sharing some snippets and nuggets and pearls of wisdom from the tafsir of Surah Yusuf, which I do during the course of the week. Now, last week we discussed how Yusuf ﷺ asked the king to make him the Minister of Finance. And he mentioned the two qualities that he had, Hafidun Alim, that I am honest and I have the knowledge, I have the skills. We explained that when there is a need for you particularly to step up, then you can ask for a position of leadership. Even though generally, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has discouraged us, you know, to desire a position of leadership due to ego. And he has warned us that if you do that and you put yourself forward because you want the fame that goes with the position, or you want the satisfaction for the ego, then Allah's help will not be with you. But if you are genuinely, and the emphasis is in the word genuinely, if you are genuinely the best person for the job, then you need to step forward for the greater good. It's also permissible to mention what are your qualities at a time when it's necessary. Like, for example, if you go for a job interview. And these two qualities are what is required in any finance minister and any leader. You cannot be trustworthy, but you don't have the skills. Or you have the skills, but you're not trustworthy. You need both. Allah then says in the subsequent verses that Yusuf alayhi salam was then given control over the entire land. He asked to be finance minister, but the king basically accepted Islam and retired and gave him total control. So the brothers dropped him to the well to disgrace him. Allah elevated him to the throne of Egypt. And Allah says that we do not let the good deeds of those who do good go to waste. So that's what we discussed last week. This week we pick it up now. Yusuf alayhi salam is in charge of Egypt. They have the 7 years of prosperity, then the 7 years of drought hit, as per the king's dream, right? During these 7 years of drought, interestingly, Yusuf alayhi salam, to show solidarity with the masses who were going through a difficult time, instructed the cooks in the palace to only cook 1 meal a day. Only 1 meal a day. It's not a let them eat cake kind of situation. He wanted the officials and those in power to know what the masses were going through, number one. Number two, he put in place a very workable system, reasonable pricing, and those who came from outside of the country could also purchase food. Because the drought did not hit Egypt only, it hit a more vast area, and that included Canaan, from where he came, which is part of Palestine. So people could come, but there was a rationing system, one camel load of grain per person. So Allah says, وَجَاءَ إِخْوَةُ يُوسُفَ فَدَخَلُوا عَلَيْهِ فَعَرَفَهُمْ وَهُمْ لَهُ مُنْكِرُونَ. They came, 10 brothers, the 10 brothers from the first mother. Yusuf and Binyamin were from the second mother. They came, Yusuf alayhi salam recognized them. Why? Because they were much elder at the time when he was separated from them. Their features hadn't changed much. He was much younger. His features had changed significantly. Secondly, as a king, when they came, he could ask them, who are you? Where are you from? What's your lineage? Who's your father? But they couldn't ask him, right? Then he was in all his royal garb, etc. So that was more of a camouflage. Now, and this is the point I want to drive home for today. Yusuf alayhi salam was in a position where he could take full revenge. This was not ordinary, an ordinary crime where they did him down in the inheritance, or, there was some sibling rivalry or anything of that sort. This was where they threw him to the bottom of the well. For 40 years he was separated from his father. He grew up without the shadow of his father. Yet he gave them royal treatment, put them up in the palace, looked after them. Now they were given 10 portions of grain, right? 1 camel load per person. So they said to him that, فَلَمَّا جَهَزَهُمْ بِجَهَزِهِمْ قَالَ أَتُونِي. He said to them, or they said to Yusuf alayhi salam rather, that we've got another brother who's back home with our father, and our father is very attached to him, so he did not let him come. Can you give us 1 extra load so we can take his share as well? Yusuf alayhi salam said, that's not how the rules work. But the next time you come, قَالَ أْتُونِي بِأَخِلَّكُم مِّنْ أَبِيكُمْ. Bring him with. You can see I give full measure. But if you don't bring him with, then you're going to make me suspicious that you lied, that you had an 11th brother. Then I won't give you nothing for lying. So now they were in a predicament. They said, okay, we're going to try and convince our father, but whether we can convince him or not remains to be seen. وقال لفتيانه جعلوا بضاعتهم في رحالهم لعلهم يعرفونها إذا انقلبوا إلى أهلهم لعلهم يرجعون. So Yusuf alayhi salam then said to them, okay, he said to his workers, they used merchandise to pay for the grain. Yusuf alayhi salam said, put the merchandise back into the grain. When they go home and they open the grain, they'll realize we gave the payment back. And why did Yusuf alayhi salam do this? He understood they were going through a very difficult time. He did not want that they mustn't come back because they didn't have money to purchase the next round of grain. Now, there's more detail, and we'll discuss it in the coming weeks, inshallah, when they go to their father and how they present it to Yaqub alayhi salam, etc. But the point I want to drive home for this week is, as we are about to conclude the program, look at the forgiveness in the heart of Yusuf alayhi salam. What a big heart he had. And that's the lesson we need to take from the tafsir of Surah Yusuf. That these brothers, you know, when somebody is closer to you and they harm you, it hurts more. It's more difficult to forgive. They separated him from his father, a little boy. They dropped him in the well. They sold him off as a slave the next day. They came looking for him and they made sure that he must go. They were the reason he grew up without a father. He went and ended up in prison. But look at the forgiveness. He had the full authority and ability to take revenge from them. He could have imprisoned them. He could have executed them. They would not have been able to do anything. But he chose to forgive them. He forgave them even before he revealed himself to them. And he gave them the food due to necessity, and he told them, bring your brother, because he wanted to meet Binyamin. On the one hand, you marvel at the system of Allah Ta'ala. On the other hand, you also marvel at the level of forgiveness that Allah had blessed Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam with. Have a big heart. You cannot live your life without people offending you, hurting you, doing wrong to you in some way or the other, but have a heart to forgive for your own benefit and for the pleasure of Allah. Until next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.